Please join me in welcoming Michael Quinn Sullivan. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Sullivan, thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Good morning. May I say you don't look that evil to me.
It's too early in the morning to
Is that
look
what
evil.
it is?
Yeah.
So contrary to your reputation.
The cold has kept the horns down.
I think we might begin there with your reputation and the names people call you. You've been called well, it's an opportunity to rebut your critics, which I think is part of the deal here. You've been called a jihadist. You've been called a bully. You've been called an absolutist. You've been identified as one of the reasons that civility has disappeared from the Texas Capitol. Why do people say such things about you?
I don't know if they're true. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why people say the things that I can't speak for other people. I can sort of speak for myself occasionally.
Well, let me ask you to speak for yourself. Yeah, what is it about you that you think drives people to those places? And what is it that you believe that you think is so controversial? Or do you think it's controversial?
I don't think there's much I believe that's very controversial, quite frankly. I think I think in many ways, there's what we've seen occur over the past couple of years has been a resurgence of citizen engagement and involvement in state governments. I mean, we haven't seen in a long time. As a young reporter who would come to Austin and cover legislative sessions for the Herald and then for the Facts, there'd be no human beings here. There would just be legislators, staff, and lobbyists. And you'd occasionally have the smattering of
not humans, politicians.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's a different class.
To make the
distinction, it's a different class.
Right.
You shouldn't have people participating. Well, more and more people have begun to participate. I think there's some folks who don't like that, and for whatever reason,
you are their representative.
I get to be blamed for that. That's fine. I don't mind being blamed.
But you are their representative. You see yourself as the representative of regular citizens as they wish to advocate for various things at the Capitol.
Yeah, I don't think I'm representative very much, other than I think that there's some who want to, he's the bad guy. He's the that's
right.
fine. Rather than attempt to criticize the constituent, criticize people. Well, let's just pick on this guy and just blame him for the problem. That's fine.
Well, we'll come to who exactly you represent here in a little while, but I want to ask you to articulate, if you would please, the mission of the organizations you lead and your own mission as you fight these fights at the Capitol. What would you say is your purpose in doing the work that you do?
Yeah, our work. First, we're as our name implies, we're very much wanting to see greater fiscal stewardship. We see that many of the problems of the government go back to dollars, and make sure that dollars are well spent. The dollars are spent for purposes that are articulated. And we talked this week, piece in the Dallas Morning News. We're talking about quite a bit more over the next couple weeks and a couple months. The problem where the ledge on the one hand says, well, here, give us this money. We're going to take this money from you to do this good and noble purpose.
This is money collected from the red light camera program.
Yeah, that's one example.
Right.
Red lights. We're going to have these red light cameras. We're going to take that money, and part of that money is going to go to fund trauma centers. And well, okay, that's a good and noble use of the dollars.
Right.
Except that they're not actually spending the money in those trauma centers, being used to help balance the books. Well, that's dishonest. We want greater, better stewardship, greater honesty in government, see more transparency in government. And then we also have a strong component wanting to see more people engaged, more people involved in the process.
Right.
There's an excellent book written a couple of years ago by James Siricki, a business writer.
Writer for the New Yorker magazine.
Yeah. Excellent book, The Wisdom of the Crowds, in which you kind of walk through. These are all kind of more business-related examples you walk through, but how the more people you have putting their eyes on a problem with their discrete bits of knowledge, information, wisdom, life experiences, the more likely you are to come to elegant solutions.
Can't disagree with that. More engaged people makes for a better state. So it's fiscal conservatism, as you define it, that you're advocating for, and as well transparency on government and the processes of government.
Yes.
The work that people do. This manifests itself, from what I can tell, as far as the specific work that you do, in two main ways. One is the now famous scorecard, in which you grade legislators on a series of votes that demonstrate in your minds and in the minds of your colleagues the fiscal conservatism or lack thereof of members. Mm-hmm. And you also are engaged in the effort to recruit candidates for office to run
I'll
against.
stop you there. We don't do much in the way of recruiting. Always happy to talk
Well, maybe
to
you're
people.
not literally going out and laying hands on people, but there's no question that you're actively
I'm Presbyterian.
engaged.
We don't do that sort of thing.
Okay. Actively engaged in the conversation about which members, which elected officials, not just members of the ledge, but even statewide elected officials, might be worthy of a challenge in a primary for being insufficiently conservative or insufficiently up to the standard.
No. Like
You disclaim any involvement in that at all?
What I'm always excited is talk to folks who are interested in running for office. People who decide to. But look, running for office, for as much as we find ourselves disagreeing with any particular elected official, at the end of the day, no one, don't speak in absolutes, most people don't get into politics and say, what can I do to do horrible, evil, rotten things? No, people get in because they genuinely feel that they want to serve their community, they want to serve the people of Texas, they want to try to do the right thing.
Right.
People and people should get into politics because they feel that internal call that there's literally nothing else. There's no other way that I can help my community than by running for school board, for city council, and I think it's very disingenuous in the process for anyone to pop in and say, "Oh, Evan, come on, you'd be a great legislator. Come on, man, jump in. You should do it. You should do it." Folks really need to feel that. They need to be the ones who sit there.
So in fact, the purpose of your...
So very often I'm chatting with folks thinking about running. I feel one of my first obligations is convince people not to do it.
Try to persuade people not to run for office.
Not to run.
Because?
Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, I think very often there are folks who haven't fully considered the cost of running, that it takes a horrible toll on people's families, it takes a horrible toll on their professions, particularly something like state rep, $600 a month for what is very often truly a full-time job, at least in terms of evenings, lunches, other things.
Right.
The cost takes professionally, the cost takes on your family. Two, it's just a wearing down process, and goodness, guys like me, we contribute to the wearing down of the process.
Yeah.
But you are, when you step forward to hold this office of public trust, that's a lot of responsibility.
So you don't
deserve Chris. So these folks need to understand what the cost is, and if they do, then well, great. Then let's have that discussion. But first, let's make sure that they don't have someone whispering in their ear because some consultant who looks at them as being a good fundraising tool to buy a new pool or make a payment on a Beamer or whatever it might be. We need to make sure these are folks who truly are interested in serving rather than are...
Right. So you don't consider it your role to identify challengers, but often the inevitable consequence of the scorecard that you produce is to identify people who you might consider to be lacking in some way or ways, and it might be the result of that scorecard that in their home districts people rise up, and so you don't have a direct relationship to the recruitment of primary challengers, but you acknowledge that may be one of the consequences of.
Well, what I hope that is that our index, coupled with the other organizations and groups that do scorecards and indexes and other things, so all that stuff comes in together. When I go vote, I don't rely on our scorecard as the only method for deciding who to vote for, and neither should anyone else.
Well, let's talk about the scorecards. The scorecards have been controversial for a number of reasons. One is, and you hear this occasionally from legislators who admittedly get bad grades on the scorecard. So let's understand at least that perspective that they're coming from.
Mrs. Smith was always bad making math tests.
But
I told my parents that repeatedly.
The challenge to your scorecard is it's a selective use of a fraction of the total votes taken at the legislature. You make an assessment of a grade, which then follows these legislators around on the basis of not the totality of their work at the legislature, but on a handful of votes chosen selectively and, as your critics will suggest at least, taken out of context. What do you say about that? Senator Kel Seliger, I know, who is a recent antagonist of yours and you of his, in the Midland Reporter-Telegram a few weeks ago, accused you of running a phony rating system born of fraudulent manipulation of voting records. What do you say about that?
And those are all big words at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm sure his consultant got paid good dollars to write that for him. Number one, all of our votes we announce in advance. We tell people in advance the themes, the votes, the bills, where possible, the amendments. We notify them through emails to their offices, letters to their offices, phone calls, every way, social media we post up, all those kind of things. Letting them know what we're scoring. So this way, they can tell us, oh wait, this bill doesn't do what it says it, what you think it does, or We also, after, as we're getting towards the end of the legislative session, we said, no, these are the votes that we've used. These are the votes of the ones that we said we're going to be looking at, the ones we're using because there was a recorded vote on, whatever. Let us know. And, Charlie Guerin, great example. Mr. Guerin from up in Fort Worth, at one point said, oh, Mike, we're using a vote that actually, because of this amendment in the process, it changed. Oh, great.
Didn't do what you think it did, right?
Yeah, fantastic. That's great to know.
How many votes go into the scorecard?
Varies with the legislative session. The current one, I think there are 30-some votes on the...
How many votes does the legislator take over the course of a session? So you are prepared on the basis of 30 votes that you selectively choose. And of course, it's your right to choose them. No one is disputing that it is your right to choose them. On the basis of 30 votes out of thousands that are taken by a legislator over the course of a session, you are prepared to give them a grade on their fiscal conservatism.
Absolutely. We're at least giving them a grade based on how they vote on those votes as exemplar votes. Here's Quinn Sullivan.
You don't think that's just a snapshot of the total picture of the work that they do over the course of the session?
Yeah, but snapshots are fairly reliable. There's a snapshot on your driver's license for a reason. It's not who you are in totality, but it's a good representation of who you are. Snapshots are valuable. And that's why I always caution folks whenever we talk about our scorecard or any others, look at all of them. We're fallible. We miss things. There are votes we miss, other things. Use lots of group scorecards. I think there should be more of those out there, not less.
More information for voters being better than
more
less.
Scorecards, more folks bringing their eyes onto a problem. Quinn Sullivan, you brought up Mr. Sullivan. This is a guy who, up on his campaign website, says, I'm against all mandates. I don't want any mandates. I want no regulations. Well, except for when he's in Austin, then he wants them. But back home, he doesn't campaign on those things. He campaigns on something else. Why doesn't he campaign on the mandates that he votes for? Why doesn't he campaign on the taxes that he votes to levy in the speech? He doesn't campaign on those things. He doesn't talk about those things back home. And it annoys them when people go, oh, well, it was just one vote to raise taxes. It was one vote. Look at all these other things to do. Right. Yeah, but why don't you campaign on it? You campaigned on these other things.
Can I ask you about a specific thing? So Seliger went in this op-ed in the Midland paper. I thought this was an interesting example. He talked about a vote in 2009 that was taken to fund a program to eradicate the prospect of bacterial diarrhea contracted at recreation areas in the state. Open water recreation areas.
The number 15 is important. Just keep that in mind as you're asking.
Okay, so Seliger's point is, I voted to support a program that had the purpose of eradicating the possibility of contracting bacterial diarrhea at open water recreation systems. Mr. Sullivan criticizes me as not being sufficiently fiscal conservative for voting for that program. He says I'm not fiscal conservative. I say he's pro-diarrhea. Now, I guess you've been called worse.
I should probably ask you,
are you, Mr. Sullivan, in fact, pro-diarrhea? But so there's an example where Mr. Seliger says, it's one vote obviously taken of many, but he says there is where the scorecard is faulty. They focus on this question of, did you vote to spend money on a program that he or his colleagues may perceive to be unnecessary, and yet look at the good it does. It's totally taken out of context.
Well, again, that number 15 is very important. According to legislative analysis, there were 15 cases of the big problem that Mr. Seliger is now saying they were trying to solve. 15 cases worldwide. The planet Earth, 15 documented cases. That's kind of a 15 cases. That's a wow. Let's just go change the course of mighty rivers, bend steel with our bare hands for 15 documented worldwide cases. So we're going to do these new laws, new bureaus of government. Reagan said, the closest thing to eternal life is a government bureau that we'll see on this earth. Let's step back a second. Remember Seliger, who says, I'm not going to vote for new regulations, new mandates, these things, but for the sake of 15 cases worldwide, suddenly that compels, state action. Well,
you have an issue.
Yeah, I think that's a silly. Why don't we trust local governments to take care of this? Why don't we trust? That's what Seliger says. Is what he campaigns on. That's his solution. Well, except for when he's Austin, then we're going to mandate it. Let's reserve the outrage for supporting bacterial diarrhea for someone who supports, dumping stuff into rivers and oceans to cause bacterial diarrhea. That's kind of silly.
How do you measure success? What are the metrics of success for the work that you do? Well, and I guess I want to ask this specifically. Where are your pelts? Show me the pelts of of animals you've trapped over the course of this? Or tell me legislation that would not exist but for your work, or things that would exist but for your work. Are there electoral heads on your mantle? Define success for us in the work that you do.
Yeah, I think success for us is seen by how much more folks we see getting engaged in the process. Certainly there are the policy outcomes that we're interested in observing, the keeping Texas strong economically, those kind of things. But success has a great many fathers, and failure is...
Well, but keeping Texas strong economically and getting more people engaged are both abstract measures of success. Can you point to anything concrete that your organization has advocated for?
One of the, actually one of the very first things that we did as we started was this idea of state government transparency. Remember in 2007, late 2006, we started talking about this, 2007, that legislative session. We were told that was a stupid idea, that no one was interested in having the state post the expenditures online. Mark Strama and Ken Paxton couldn't find anyone who was overly interested in that idea. Lots of folks telling us repeatedly, no, that's not important, it's not useful, oh, it'll cost so much money to put the state's expenditures online. Well, Susan Combs got behind it, the governor got behind it, suddenly it passed unanimously then.
Yeah.
But after being told, oh, this won't go anywhere, no one's interested in this. Well, that's probably one of the most important things that we can do.
And so you
talk about the cost savings.
Yeah. You feel that there's some credit due to you and others who have advocated for it.
I think there's a lot of credit due to a lot of folks who got involved and engaged in that process.
Was the last session, let's speak specifically about the 82nd legislative session, was it adequately conservative, fiscally conservative for your taste?
2010 was a game-changing election.
Right.
The people of Texas in huge numbers changed the political map of Texas. The 2011 session wasn't a game-changing session. You didn't see with a supermajority of Republicans, you didn't see them do the kind of super reforms. It was a supermajority bereft of the super in some ways. Right. The kind of reforms that you would have expected them to have pursued.
How much more conservative could the session last time have been? Tell me something that didn't happen that would have happened. If Ken Paxton had, I know you advocated for a change in the leadership of the House. Mm-hmm. If Ken Paxton had been Speaker last session instead of Joe Strauss, tell me something more conservative that would have happened that would have satisfied you.
I never play hypothetical games, and I have no idea. I mean, Ken Paxton could have woken up one morning and gone crazy.
Forget about
looking at the outcomes of the
Paxton.
session.
I mean,
looking at the outcomes of the session. For example, we had a state budget that was primarily balanced with spending cuts, but is also a state budget that employed no small measure of gimmicks and smoke and mirrors and tricks.
Ever thus, of course, they've been doing this for years.
They've been. Yes.
Not to excuse
doing
it,
it for years.
They've been doing it for years.
That's a great reason to keep doing wrong things. Oh, well, gosh.
I guess the point is, though,
Evan's always been kicking puppies, so it's okay for him to kick puppies.
But I guess, Mr. Sullivan, the point is it wasn't a departure from the way that the legislature was run previously, but in fact it was.
But it should have been. We should have had a departure.
Right.
It was a game-changing election.
And you put the responsibility for the lack of a departure in that respect at whose feet?
The Republican majority, Republican leadership. But also put some sense on the backs of all of us as voters, who we very often pat our guys on the head and tell them to, go to Austin and do good things, and we ignore them. Well, we need to be much more engaged and involved. I mean, Ross Ramsey, your managing editor, at one point last spring, I think it was during the budget day, if I remember correctly, said, the legislators need to stop listening to the voters. They just need to tell them to shut up and eat their vegetables. They need to be the grown-ups. Well, we take a very different view. We suggest that the voters are the grown-ups and that the legislators are the employees, that they need to be listening more to the voters, not less. That the legislators occasionally be told to shut up and listen to their constituents more.
But if the voters return many of these same people to the Capitol every 2 years and 4 years,
you're more likely to find a congressman die in office than lose election. I think I read it at one point recently. That's right, and that's why we want more people engaged, more people involved. I think it's we need more people involved in primary elections. We need more people turning out to vote for school board and city council. We need more people involved. But that's also why you need, I would suggest, more groups like ours out there talking about how the legislators are doing at home. Because, again, let's go back to the example you start off with, Kel Seliger. Kel Seliger at home says, I'm going to vote to cut your taxes and no more regulations and no more mandates on local government and on. But then in Austin, he votes a different way. Right. Well, I support the Kel Seliger who talks the way he talks at home. It's the guy who invades his body and votes in the Senate.
But if the voters keep reelecting him, that is their choice. That's democracy.
But hopefully they need to be making that choice in the context of how he's voting.
Right. Let me ask you.
You're right. At the end of the day, when there's greater political transparency, that's great.
People make better choices.
When people are voting, knowing how the electors are actually performing.
Right.
That's excellent. That's great. That's perfect. It's when the guys go home and campaign in a manner differently than how they legislate. That's the problem.
Let me ask you specifically about Joe Strauss. You and your organization have seemed to make sport of busting the speaker's chops over the last couple of years. What's your problem with the speaker? Do you not like the speaker personally? Do you just think the speaker is insufficiently conservative? What's your Strauss problem?
I don't think there is a Strauss problem. I think there's a problem with his leadership. I think there's a problem, again, with a game-changing election, 101, 99
plus 2
turned into 101.
Right.
With a supermajority in the Texas House. There was not a greater push on some systemic reforms. Now, Texas Conservative Coalition identified $20 billion worth of savings that could result from some systemic reforms. Only about 2 or 3 billion of those were touched. Texas Public Policy Foundation identified about 15 billion. There was some overlap there of items. Hardly any of those were touched. Lots of opportunities for reform that the committee chairs, who are appointed by the speaker, the committee chairs never even considered, never even brought
So you
forward.
put that on Strauss, because Strauss has said all along, I run the House at the will of the members. So if the members don't, you don't buy that.
No, look, that's a cop out. The Texas House is not, or else, maybe there was the vote and I missed it. Again, earlier comment, not infallible. I don't recall the vote where each committee chair was brought forward for the House to vote on. That didn't happen. Did that happen? Did that happen? Did Speaker Strauss bring each committee chairman up and say, let's vote on who the committee chair of Ways and Means is? So it's not the will of the House. Yeah. It's, that's a great phrase to toss out to guys like you and say, it's the will of the House, and everyone sounds good and everybody walks away. That's not what happens. The Speaker of the House gets to appoint the committee chairs. The committee chairs have approaching dictatorial control. The Speaker has, but we learned under the previous Speaker, the previous Speaker taught us that speakers get to just ignore even motions from the House. And the power that these guys wield in the policymaking process is immense.
Was Craddock a more conservative speaker than Strauss?
There were certainly more conservative. There were greater strides made for conservatives under Craddock and Strauss, but at the same time, you were coming. It was a different
more to your liking.
Well, no, it was a different place. It was a different. You're coming out of a different era.
Strauss gave a couple of interviews in the last few months in which he talked about not being able to cut our way to prosperity. This raised your dander. You wrote a couple of columns criticizing the speaker for suggesting that...
When you're balding, do you have dander?
Well, maybe you do. I don't know. Suggesting that there may be some possibility to contemplate new revenues. And you said Reagan conservatives would not like the fact that Joe Strauss as speaker is contemplating new revenues. Ronald Reagan raised taxes 12 times in his 8 years as president.
I'm not sure I used the phrase. I don't think I used that phrase used, but go.
Well, you did use, I can point to you where you specifically cited Reagan conservatives. Ronald Reagan raised taxes 12 times as president, including what I believe is still the largest tax increase as a percentage of the economy in American history. Why would Ronald Reagan get a good grade on your scorecard based on that standard?
Yeah, again, I don't do hypotheticals. I was in...
Well, that's a pretty specific question,
I was in
Mr.
junior
Sullivan.
high. I was in junior high when Reagan was president and wasn't head of TFR, and he wasn't the governor of Texas or in the legislature. But the look, again, when you look at Texas Conservative Coalition, points to $20 billion in systemic reforms. When Texas Public Policy Funds $15 billion in savings from systemic reforms. That means we need to let's fix spending. Let's fix the spending first. When we find that we're the alleged withholding cash for trauma centers to balance the books, let's bring greater transparency and honesty into the budget mix, then we get to have a grown-up discussion about priorities, about revenue streams. But let's have an honest budget first. Let's start cleaning up the gimmicks that have been used, as you noted, for a long time.
Yeah.
But the people of Texas have asked for some game-changing things to take place.
We have a few minutes left. I want to stay on this question of transparency and shift the conversation a little bit. You worked for Ron Paul from 1995 to 1999.
Yes.
The time that you worked for Ron Paul is at least in part the time that these now famous newsletters that were written by Ron Paul or not written by Ron Paul were at issue. You were his press person in his office in Washington. Did you write any of the newsletters, Mr. Sullivan, that were at issue in this presidential campaign?
No, the newsletters, as I recall, the newsletters, I think he stopped the publication of the newsletters in 94, 95.
So there were no newsletters done during the time that you worked for Ron Paul?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right.
He may have, he kept his businesses separate from campaigns and all. But to the extent that he was writing newsletters previously and had things published under his name, well, those became campaign questions.
And in fact, you defended
the
them.
Campaign defended him.
Yeah. In '96, Lefty Morris, aptly named perhaps, who was running against Ron Paul as a Democrat for Congress.
I was never sure if it was his politics or his baseball.
Baseball is a Southpaw Morris. Accused Ron Paul of raising some incendiary things in those newsletters of supporting the possibility of bombing IRS buildings, of viewing cross-burning as an emblem of freedom of speech. And you defended those statements as Ron Paul's press secretary, said that it was silly for anybody to attack Ron Paul for comments made in an abstract sense. As you hear the controversy over the Paul newsletters played out now, do you continue to think that it was wise to defend those comments back then?
Well, as his 25-year-old press secretary doing the job of a press secretary of issuing out the positions of the campaign, that's what you do as a press secretary of an organization.
You were not supporting Ron Paul this time around.
I was very proud to be in Iowa for Governor Perry.
Yeah.
I had a good time up there. But I think the 15 years over the time is 13 years since working for Ron, 16 years since stuff came up. I'd probably have to point you to Dr. Paul and let him speak for himself on his behalf.
On the question of transparency, before we open it up to the audience, you run an organization, Empower Texans Foundation, that is a 501c3. Texans for Fiscal Responsibility is a 501c4. Mm-hmm. The C3 organization is tax exempt. Mm-hmm. You are not required by IRS regulations to post your financials on your website, to disclose your donors, or to give us any information at all about the operations of your organization.
We have to file 990s.
Well, you have to file them, but you're not obligated to provide us access to them on your website. Right. You're not obligated by regulation. But you demand transparency of all of us in the media. You demand transparency of every legislator. Why are you demanding of other people what you seem unwilling to provide yourself? I had to go hunting around for your 990s. I had to go to the Texas Ethics Commission to find out that you've raised somewhere south of $900,000 in the last 4 years, all but $100,000 of it from Tim Dunn, Jim Leininger, Bob Perry, Jeff Sandifer, and Ken Legler's campaign. If I'm curious if I'm curious to know whether there are activities that you're undertaking as an organization that may directly benefit your donors, which is what you often accuse people in the media or in politics of doing, I have to actually work very hard to find the level of transparency in your organization that you seem to demand of others. Why is that not hypocritical of you?
Well, we make a clear distinction between private organizations and government. People are free to give or not give to organizations, whether it's Texas Tribune or Empower Texans.
Of course, we post every single donor to our organization on our website in one place, our 990s, our audited financials. We don't have to do it, but we think transparency is a good thing.
We tend to take the view, because of the work that we do, kind of like ACLU does, kind of like lots of groups on the left and the right do, that you need to be very careful, because we're out criticizing government. We're out knocking these guys, and so the donors could become targets. You see that happen repeatedly.
Well, you target our donors.
Happened recently.
Yeah.
When you start taking the positions, guess what? That's you're now opening that up. So we're going to protect our donors. Now, to the extent that a donor wants to pop out and say, I give money to this group, good for them. Now, to the extent when it's PAC-related activities, when it's campaign activities, we follow that with the Texas Ethics Commission. Glad that.
But you don't even feel obligated to publish the 990s that you're required to file with the IRS, just outlining your basic financials with no donor information up on your website.
I would make them available as the IRS requires. Because law requires you.
Okay. Well, Mr. Sullivan, you're very nice to be with us this morning. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Good to see you. Thank you.